Hello, this is Vision Denial and Clearing Vision MSI 2022 edition. My name is Sam. I had watched every single playoff match of all the 11 regions, yes, including that one. And this show is literally just a daily recap of what has gone on and my thoughts regarding some of the trends, tribulations, and so on and so forth. A couple of things to note. Today, in the match of Royal Never Give Up versus Paris Saint-Germain, we had a substitution put in. Note that Hanabi was benched for the game and for Azhi. Later on, I will discuss what that means. But otherwise, everything else seemed pretty good. With that, let's take a look at the games of the day. Starting with Group C, with the European G2 versus North America's Evil Geniuses. And what a dicey game out of G2. Holding much of the lead, and one mistake from Caps almost cost them the whole game. But they course corrected and staved off the incredible push by Evil Genius and pulled out a win when it was definitely needed. That said, Evil Genius had such an efficient Baron to equalize the lead completely, and I'm surprised that we didn't see more proactivity like that from them. Even so, it wasn't consistent, and you can tell they were antsy to get the game over as soon as possible, fumbling and rushing two different fights that honestly just cost them the whole game in critical moments. So what does this look like overall in the gold graph over here? Well, taking a look at the situation here, you can visually see the moment where Evil Geniuses grabbed the Baron and got full control of everything. And the unfortunate matter of the situation is that they only had 3 neutral objectives that they controlled during the entire game. And this is wild to see because, like, the second they grabbed Baron, they took the turret lead. They held the entire map under their control, and it looked like a game that was just done for. G2 had messed up. It was going to be their one fumble for this particular group, and that they would just have to course correct afterwards and make sure it doesn't happen again. Instead, what we got was an Evil Geniuses who finally held the lead and looked like they were nervous that they were going to lose with a newly acquired control over the entire game. Which is rather unfortunate because this was a crazy efficient Baron. Like, an 8k lead gone. Like, gone in a minute. That's virtually unheard of in most scenarios. And I'm hoping the Evil Geniuses can bounce back from this the next time they face against G2 because this was really good from them. But we'll see. Next up, we have North America's Evil Genius versus the LCO's Order in Oceania. This is the longest game so far, and not because of how close it was. Evil Genius was slower, but methodical, clean, and by the books, as Order was split on what to do. Evil Geniuses closed out the game excellently and found great moments for neutrals that really played to their strengths. A little worried for their tempo, mostly because the rest of the tournament seems to be playing at breakneck speeds, especially the teams that are like considered the favorites to watch. Order, for their part, have some moments of brilliance, but it's short-lived and they look split and disjointed overall. I would like to see more coordination and maybe a little bit more gumption from their play, as this was the most passive I've seen them play in a long time, really. So, what does the game look like in the gold graph over here? Well, just a slow, gradual increase. And you can tell that, like, Evil Geniuses were ready to give up neutral objectives when they could, right? Seoul was never taken at any given point of the game, but it was equalized. And unfortunately to the situation, Order never really had a strong chance to really guarantee that they were going to get Seoul, to use that, or to use any kind of win condition they had drafted for themselves. It was a very strong team fighting composition that they held, which is super unfortunate because they're usually a little bit more creative on that front, and instead just passively laid back as if scaling was going to save them. And it never came. Just sort of poofed out of thin air. Evil Geniuses on their part at least show that they are still capable of strong, consistent play. And this looked a lot more like the kind of play that they showed us in the later parts of their playoff run. And it's really nice to see this kind of proactivity from them. I just want to see it be executed against G2 Esports. But we'll see. I'll get the chance to do that rematch against them in their day 6, if I remember correctly. So, let's see who's next. We head to Group A with the Japanese Detonation Focus Me versus Saigon Buffaloes of the Vietnamese VCS. And, oh god, this game was so messy. Like, Detonation Focus Me played a game where the top side should have been dominant, and yet we're still ignoring the alarm bells that were happening on bot side. Never addressing Shogun's Lucian, having poor vision control, and some very bizarre macro choices allowed Saigon Buffalo to just sit back, farm, and find opportunities and win off the very awful mistakes from Detonation Focus Me. Not to say that the Buffaloes are free of criticism in this game. The tempo of the game and how they pushed for leads and advantages were super inefficient and reckless on so many occasions. They were able to stave off the plays from Detonation Focus Me with some of their very solid vision control, but my goodness, was this ever a sloppy game. So let's take a look at what that shows on the gold graph here. And, geez, it's kind of all over the place. This is the most wild graph so far in the tournament. Now it just looks like the early game was Detonation Focus Me, and boom, next we got the Buffaloes. But if you kind of look like the up and downs of the whole situation, neither team really learned how to balloon their leads efficiently in any given way, shape, or form. Sure, the Buffaloes eclipsed the lead and getting it in their full control by the 21-minute mark, where they got their Baron. But do you see how they had to take 3 separate Barons just to get to the point where they were to win the game? And honestly, I don't think that they could have won the game if it wasn't for the fact that Detonation Focus Me opted in while they had an open nexus, or not an open nexus, but virtually an open nexus, trying to take the Elder Drake with no defense whatsoever. This was Bean Jay, the jungler, decided to not even contest the Elder Drake and went to backdoor. This was so foolish. I don't want to see this kind of play from Detonation Focus Me again. But equally, it showed that the Buffaloes were not just relegated to trying to get third place in this situation, that they were equally a threat and could stave off these early game teams, which is kind of what we expected. It's just, it was so inconsistent. Up next, we got over here the Latin Americans Team Ace versus T1 from the LCK in Korea. Gosh, I don't know how to put this. Honestly, T1 didn't miss a step. The early game showed full respect while also pushing what they do best. Ace is not accustomed to playing at this tempo, and because of it, they were dismantled every second. The non-stop kills and siege from T1 meant no time to breathe or collect gold, as T1 make an incredibly complicated composition look easy to play. Ace shouldn't take this as a personal mark on their performance. This is kind of a rite of passage, and now that you know you have to aggressively strike first against T1, you'll get an opportunity on the rematch to attempt this. And this will show most of the other teams that You don't let T1 get their setup going for their compositions early in. Otherwise, it might look like, oh my god, I hesitate to show the gold graph, but it may look like this. Full control. Not a single plate, not a single objective. And sure, kills were given away, but like, at no point, this is a 17,000 lead by the time the game ended before 21 minutes hit. Other games hit 36 plus minutes and barely scratched 12,000. T1 did it casually. This looked so casual. And if this wasn't already such a huge indicator of why I think T1 is the favorite to win the game, this was done using a composition that had a Kindred, a Senna, and a Wukong for the bot side. Jungle Kindred, Senna Marksman, and Wukong in the bot side, a composition that should have been challenged and punished aggressively. And instead, steamrolled all the way through. All right, so let's look at the next one. All right. We head to Group B for the Turkish Istanbul Fast Pay Wildcats versus the Red Canids Kalunga in the CB Lull right from Brazil. This was a little bit messier than usual. This was super messy, but some solid signs of hope from both teams. I saw nice attempts for team fighting as well as some vision play, but it's inconsistent. And it seemed like both teams were super uncertain on how to approach holding control of the game. Neither team really ballooning their leads, especially as the way it was needed, or pressing their advantages properly. And it leaves me with some sour taste in my mouth, but more like lemons that could become lemonade if the approach was polished for either team. This analogy breaks down really quickly, as there's nothing to compare it to sugar. Maybe it's just some sweet, sweet macro plays. Lemonade. Anywho, so what do I mean by a lot of this? Well, let's take a look at the goal graph then. Taking a look at this goal graph, you can already see the back and forth nature of what's going on between these two teams. By all accounts and purposes, the Wildcats had much stronger optimization towards neutral objectives, but not by a whole lot more. They didn't make a much stronger use of the situation to be able to get where they needed to go. And Red just chose at any given point to punish where it's needed. But it's not like Red was able to just grab anything from the game themselves on a much more secure basis. Whatever leads was being taken one way or the other was being traded back and forth. And if I was to say anything from it, the goal graph just visualizes properly what's going on, is that neither team was secure in their placement and really pushed the envelope on trying to find plays where it didn't need to be found at all. I'm just hoping that the Red Canids can kind of ease up on the pressure and realize that they can execute things on a more consistent basis and doesn't need to really look for plays all the time, and that the Wildcats really need, and this is, I hark back to the video, the short video I made for them, but they need to be more consistent at ballooning their leads, because this is played like a typical game from the Wildcats, where it kind of went back and forth, and where they had a lead, usually they would have full control but not balloon it. And this kind of shows what happens if you don't balloon a lead against teams that will contest all of your fights. It will get traded back and forth very frequently. All right, so then we head to the last game of the day, where we got the LPL's Chinese representatives in the Royal Never Give Up, the defending title holders, against PSG Saint-Germain Talons from the PCS in Southeast Asia. Guys, so this was the game where Hanabi was benched for Azhi. Now, regardless of the reason, doesn't really wholly matter in this situation. And honestly, I just don't think that the Talons bot lane holds up or can. And for context, this is a bot lane that I once thought last year was one of the best, if not the best, internationally. And they just kind of fumbled and wrecked across the board. Regardless of who plays on the top side, Azhi or Hanabi, Unified isn't pulling his weight and Kaiwing is fumbling a lot, causing some difficulties in the execution of their composition. And there are moments of brilliance out of the Talons, especially during these extended fights. That said, Royal Never Give Up were much more adept at controlling leads and pushed it to the brink at a point where the Talons just really couldn't gain anything without massive continuous fumbles out of their opponents, out of Royal Never Give Up. So let's take a look at the gold graph. It may not capture a whole lot from what I'm trying to discuss, but let's take a look. Because this looks very similar to the T1 game, the only difference is that it's a little slower. There's full control, no plates being taken, no neutrals being taken, and it really disheartens because Royal Never Give Up is not an early game team. No matter how you want to look at it, sure, regions between regions, it's hard to tell which one is stronger versus another. That's fine. But this is not the bread and butter of Royal Never Give Up. Royal Never Give Up. And you can tell specifically because from the first 11 minutes of the game, the ballooning doesn't happen. But the second the 12-minute mark hits up, you can see that it starts ballooning much more aggressively. You can tell they're making more proactive moves frequently and assuredly from it. And the Talons, who usually on an early game basis are very good at counteracting anything, when they're on form, just looked passive. They were just letting it happen. And if this keeps going, I wouldn't be surprised if the Talons wind up last in this group. Now, I've seen what their pedigree looks like. I know what their regular season record is and their highs from their playoffs, but this just looked more and more like their playoff regulars, and I'm stuck here wondering why it wasn't the Flying Oysters that went instead of them. No matter, they have the chance to turn it back around. This is only the second game, but it's not looking great for them. So what are my thoughts over the day? Well, outside of some teams being super impressive, some teams being disappointed, and other teams going as expected, those tend to just not be really thoughtful patterns to think about. Even if I did go through that particular thought pattern, in the grand scheme of things, you should keep an open mind until the actual specific group days. Because the first half of the round robins feel more like testing grounds for a lot of these teams. And so let's take a look, hold back a bit, and see where things go. And where do things seem to be going? Well, a couple of notable things. Because again, there's only been 12 games so far, but something I thought was super interesting. 4 champions have a huge presence. 2 with 100 and 2 with 83%, or whatever you want to calculate it. There's a grand scheme of Ahri, Lucian, Gwen, and LeBlanc. This tells me that there's a lot of ideas about skirmishing around neutral objectives and trying to hold early control of the laning phase. Now, again, first 12 games, this could be more of a sign about like limit testing and trying to see how each laner stacks up against the others. But out of the 73 champions contested so far across the board this particular tournament, these 4 have the highest priority. And the remainder afterwards that have equal priority all have similar effects of trying to make sure to like gain control of the lane or of neutral objectives through strong skirmishing powers. Another thing I really am curious about regarding the champion trends so far are the use of Samira, which is lost on me, right? Samira so far has a 2 bans and 3 picks and no wins across the board. 0. Big goose egg. And because teams are picking Samira at what seems to be an attempt of really controlling the early game, but not getting there whatsoever, this feels very bizarre to try to pick this up now and not really push the envelope or really like aim to go there. It was really bizarre. Like, it really was just bizarre to me. It really was. Like, I don't know how else to like. And just like as an example, right? Specifically, the part of me that really sticks out in my mind right now is the Detonation Focus Me versus Saigon Buffaloes, where Udapon was given Samira, and Udapon is really proficient at this. But I mentioned they didn't answer the Lucian from Shogun at any given point. But primarily, this would have helped Udapon bring his Samira forward, because without the gold, he couldn't do anything. Urgot's going to scale the same way or across the board, regardless of the way his matchup against Aatrox works off. But Samira falls like a brick, like hits a brick wall really quickly otherwise. But I think it's mostly, at this moment, outside from that rant about Samira, again, keep in mind, first 12 games of the tournament, I'm trying to see the trend that's going off so far, and it's a lot of bruisers, it's a lot of skirmishes, and it's around a lot of neutral objectives. And regardless of how the regular season went and the playoffs went, bruisers were not the strong focus. It was around sieging, scaling, and if there is team fighting, it's team fighting at later stages in the game. It was about surviving the early game, and if you were surviving the early game, you're either wrecking it or just passing by. And now it's much more recognized as you grab early game, buy the reins, and you go. And I want to see more teams really implement that, because the draft reflects that. Like, all of the drafts, every single team are putting up, save for the one game from Order who decided to just do passive team fighting, most of the drafts going off here are, let's take the early game, bring it under our control, and go. And so I really want the teams to start playing like that, instead of just kind of meandering and hoping that the stronger teams fumble their attempts. But we'll see. Those are my thoughts, really. I really want to know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you really like this content, blah, 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 I take a time to like and subscribe. Super appreciate all of you who are watching. It means a lot to me. With it, I'm going to see you all tomorrow, right after the next day, for the first half of the round robin from group stages to be done. See you then.